Hi everyone, and welcome back to this episode of Coachy TV. I know in the last episode I promised that the next video I'd be working on was a strength plan workout video series for general prep, but I'm really getting interested in and kind of excited about this idea of heat acclimatization just from looking at various workouts I've been doing. In the last video, I guess you could call this part 1, or this the update to that video, we talked about why heat can really negatively impact your workouts, especially on the aerobic side, and how you can properly heat acclimate. And I showed you guys a real-world example of 2 workouts that I did. It's really what kind of spurred me to do that workout, doing the exact same workout on back-to-back days with very different levels of heat. And not surprisingly, the hot one, it was much more negatively impacted by it, to where it took me completely out of the training zone, was 16 seconds per mile shorter, and we'll kind of recap a little bit of that. But it wasn't even totally different in terms of the conditions. It was only 6 degrees warmer, so just that little bit of difference really can negatively impact your workout. Well, we're a few days later now, and I did that exact same workout again, and it was much closer to that workout that was very negatively impacted by the heat, but the results were very similar to that workout that was much cooler. So I think it's kind of showing acclimatization in action, and I can kind of walk you guys through, again, this real-world example, and we'll kind of briefly refresh a little bit of what we talked about in the previous one. And the idea is see how much of a difference acclimatization has in a workout, and not a huge amount of time. We talked about acclimatization can be done pretty successfully in a relatively short amount of time. This is the same picture that we had from the last ones. If I ever have an update or a part 2 video, I always like to keep the same video. And this is from recent graduates from 2017. They were both seniors this year. Sahil Deshanes on the left and Eric Jurgensmeyer on the right. Both kind of middle distance type runners at the Northport Invitational in September. September is brutally hot for us in Florida. And Northport, we're from Tampa, Florida, Wharton High School. Northport's even about 90 minutes south of us, so it's even more warm, more humid, and that kind of thing. So heat acclimatization is really important, especially at this time of year, so that you can have success in the cross-country 5K, which, you know, the longer the race, the more aerobic, the more negatively impacted it can be by heat. I am Kyle Giacono. I'm the head boys cross-country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida, and I have been for the last 7 years. A closer look at my credentials are on the screen. And in part 1, I talked about where a lot of that information was coming from, a presentation that we got from the USA Track and Field Level 3 endurance coaching curriculum. It was also in partnership with IAAF Level 5 School, and going to refresh just a little bit of that before I get into the real world scenario, where I show you how much of a difference it makes after heat acclimatization is at least starting, if not completed. So again, I'm going to blow through these first 3 slides very quickly because we went through them in detail in part 1, or the first piece of this. It's in the description down below, the first video down there, if you want a more detailed description. I'm just going to kind of refresh about this, about why heat is an issue. First off, it can increase your heart rate at any work intensity, which is a key issue for aerobic workouts. Heat is going to increase blood flow to the skin. That's a cooling mechanism, and it reduces blood flow to working muscles, making energy less available via the aerobic system. Again, a big issue for aerobic workouts. Blood plasma volume decreases through sweating. Plasma is you know, the liquid part of your blood. So this is going to also, not only is you're going to be losing it through sweat, so the blood is being compromised and reduces the cardiovascular function. It further increases heart rate. Increased acidity at lower intensities, the idea being of the reduced blood flow. Blood is hemoglobin on it is a base, and also you're messing up your blood plasma and the hemoglobin content. And then you're going to also need to supply more energy with anaerobic glycolytic system due to the reduced cardiovascular function and effectiveness of the aerobic system from the first couple things we mentioned here. Increased core body temperature. Obviously, if it's hot, you're going to have an increased core body temperature, and it's going to disrupt enzyme activity and effectiveness to produce energy and regulate many body functions. Heat is the single biggest limiting factor to aerobic work under normal conditions. That was something that Dr. Robert Chapman through USA Track and Field and Indiana University, who is the presenting person through the Level 3 school class that we went through on heat. So that was his biggest takeaway. He studies this for USA Track and Field and Indiana University's School of Kinesiology. He also looks at things like altitude, cold conditions, but this was really what jumps out to me as somebody here in Tampa, Florida, where heat is always a big thing. So the single biggest limiting factor in aerobic work under normal conditions. All right, so acclimating to the heat. If you're exposed to hot conditions safely, humans adapt reasonably well to this environmental stress. In fact, humans adapt a little bit better to this than they do even cold conditions. So it's kind of interesting that we can do, or we can adapt very well to this if we're exposed to it under safe conditions. Takes about 10 to 14 days to fully acclimate to a certain level of heat. The idea being if it gets much hotter, you're going to have to reacclimate, or if you've been taking away a heat stress for whatever reason. And about 80% of this adaptation happens within the first 5 to 6 days. This acclimatization requires exercise in hot climates, so you can't just sit in your house with the thermostat turned way up. Just sitting or living in conditions, so just kind of sitting outside, same thing. This does not allow for the adaptation needed to you need to actually exercise in heat. So they kind of studied this through USA Track and Field. Ideally, you need to be exposed to the condition for about 2 to 3 hours with a sizable chunk of that time during exercise. So what they actually did was they studied that you could actually extend the adaptation and the acclimatization process, speed it up, make it more pronounced, more effective, if you kind of did your exercise in heat and then you stayed in that hot condition for a period afterwards as your body temperature was coming down slowly and everything. The way they did it was they did the heat and then they put the athletes right into a sauna, and they found that they were more fully and quickly adapting to that heat if they did that. So you don't have to be working out for 2 to 3 hours. That's a lot, especially the 3-hour mark. I would never recommend that. But that's something else you can do, but you definitely need to exercise in those conditions to acclimate. You can't just be exposed to heat. So running on a treadmill or a stationary bike or something inside is not going to get that unless for some reason the heat is on, or down here the AC in Florida, if the AC is off, something like that. Okay, so, and you need to alter your training plan while acclimating. This is really important. As you're getting, as you've been introduced to this heat, maybe you're coming out of a detraining or a transitionary period, and I did a whole video on transition periods in the description down below, to where you probably are inside, not being exposed to the heat, or maybe you're just going from, in track, especially in Florida, when we start out conditioning December, January, and by the end, under a normal year, we've been going through May, there's points in there where the heat's just going to be kind of, dialed up. So you need to kind of make sure that you're being smart about the training volume. Reduce it some, reduce the intensity, look at things like heart rate and things like that to make sure you're in the right intensity zone for this period as you acclimate. This adjustment needs to be based on the specific climate. Makes perfect sense. You have to expose yourself to that to be acclimated. And the individual athlete being trained. The idea being that people adapt individually. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we look at the next slide. And you obviously need to increase your hydration preparation. When it's really cool outside and you almost feel like there's points a year where you just feel like you're not sweating at all. Obviously, you still have to be on top of your hydration, but more so here, you need to be preparing more with water, and you need to have some correctly timed sports drinks. I really talk about this in detail in a video in the description that talks about proper hydration. I would recommend looking at that if you want more details on it. And last thing before we get to the real world example, so proper acclimatization. What happens when you are properly acclimated? Your heart rate at any workout intensity is reduced. Well, that's fantastic. Heart rate monitoring is really important, especially for aerobic work. Increased plasma volume. Your body builds more plasma because it knows that this joker is going outside and losing a bunch of fluid, so I better offset it by increasing the plasma volume. Sweating begins sooner during exercise. Seems counterintuitive, but your body realizes that this is something you're serious to, it's used to it, and it realizes I better start sweating to help reduce the temperature, core body temperature, so it doesn't go up too quickly. Reduces need to send blood to the skin to release heat. That's not, it's effective, but it also can compromise other things that you're trying to do. So your body kind of stops doing this as much and kind of relies a little bit more on sweating. Part of it is due to the increased plasma and sweating rates. Sweat becomes more diluted. You're doing more sweating, so your body is smart about losing less electrolytes, so it dilutes your sweat more. And the use of glycogen by working muscles is reduced by about 50%. That's because your heart rate and all these other things we talked about before, you're able to actually rely on the aerobic system the way it should be. The aerobic system is much more efficient at using stored glucose or glycogen, way more so than the anaerobic glycolytic system, which is what you have to kind of rely on when your aerobic system is compromised because of heat and all the things we talked about here. And the increases in body temperature while exercising is going to be reduced, basically because your body is becoming more effective at cooling itself from things like sweating and all that, because of all the above adaptations. And as I mentioned previously, the rate and effectiveness somebody acclimates is very individual. So make sure that you're kind of keeping track of that. You might be somebody that knows the heat doesn't affect me nearly as much. I can do a couple things, but I'm usually good within a couple days. Or you might have people that are much more so. You always have those kids that really can be really negatively impacted, and you need to watch them, especially if you're coaching a group of middle school, high school kids, or young adults. Just make sure that you're realizing which one of those might be more negatively affected, which ones you need to encourage the hydration for a little bit more. Just be on top of that, because it is individualistic how well and how quickly somebody adapts. Okay, so here's the real world scenario. 2 identical workouts on back-to-back days with different heat levels. This is what I presented as evidence of why you would want to be very, very cautious of even just 6 degrees difference, because this is what made the difference. Run A and run B. So in run A, was on May 28th, went just under 39 minutes and, 39:24. It was a 5-mile run at 7:52 pace. We look at the actual metrics here, so 7:52 pace right there. 1:51, that is out of the range for an easy pace workout, and 7:52 for me would have been considerably out of or slower than what I would have expected to be on this point. I was typically targeting around this time, around low 740s, mid 730s, and it was 79 degrees on that day. Run B, which took place on the very next day, May 29th, it was just under 38 minutes, 7:36 pace, and if you look at the metrics, my heart rate was 147, which is kind of what you want. You want it to be under 150 for an aerobic threshold or easy run type of day. 16 seconds different. Okay, if you look, it was basically almost the same time. This one was 10 minutes earlier, but not that big of a difference. On back-to-back days, I even remember I ate the exact same thing for breakfast that day, and I got relatively similar amount of sleep, did similar routine, and actually the day before this May 28th run, I didn't run that day. I was still kind of in a transitionary period, kind of starting up an actual general preparation phase here today as I'm filming this on June 1st. So I was taking more time off, so I should have been more fresh, but as you can see, big issue here, big difference on this. So what's the deal here? On the second day where the workout results were much improved, it was 73 degrees. That's only 6 degrees different, but it meant the world of difference. I was not getting what I needed today. This is a tempo pace beats per minute, and it was way, way slow. This is a recovery run aerobic threshold beats per minute, and it was significantly faster. That's the main difference here, was the temperature. So here's what we're going to do is I'm going to leave workout B right there, and I'm going to show you an identical workout that was done today, which as filming this is June 1st, so not that many days later, the following week. So we'll call this run C for right now. So, June 1st, I did start going out a little bit earlier. I did want to take advantage of, I knew it was going to be pretty warm this day, and I'm trying to get back into the swing of things of running a little bit earlier. So I made a kind of a conscious effort to get back into this. I need to get back into the 7 o'clock hour for this too. And what you will notice is, throw everything up on the screen here, this was almost identical, okay? 38 minutes, 37:59, same distance. This is the exact same route that I was running, just was kind of curious with it. So 5 miles, same route. Identical time, identical pace, makes sense. Strangely enough, identical beats per minute. I'm not sure how that can happen, but it did. 73 degrees, 77 degrees. Okay, interesting. And I don't think it's because of, that difference in time there. I don't think that was the issue. I think I was just much more heat acclimated. It was only a couple days afterwards, but when I went back and I started looking at it, I took basically about 2 weeks off right at the beginning of May, and I kind of restarted just some easy runs here and there on May 20th. So when I went back and I counted it, this workout on June 1st was 12 days after I started just, maybe 3-4 times a week going out and doing a run like this. Sometimes I was doing 6 miles, sometimes I was doing 4, but 5 was what I was settling on most of the time. 12 days means I'm pretty much in the window of being almost fully, if not completely, heat acclimated to maybe high 70s, and that might have been why it made a difference. Whereas when we looked back about, 4 days earlier, I was still kind of in that window of I've made maybe 80% or 70% or whatever of the adaptations, but I wasn't there yet. So I think that's what this is kind of showing, is that I'm either fully or almost fully adapted to high 70s, this relative humidity that we're getting here in the northern part of Hillsborough County, which is where Tampa, Florida is. I thought that was really interesting to kind of look at. Just everything was identical, and the level of heat was closer to that run A, which was seriously compromised. So I think this really shows acclimatization in action, what it really means as you kind of let the process happen. I certainly did not adapt aerobically. I didn't make any structural changes or anything, which is what aerobic improvements are, between June 1st and May 28th, when the first workout was run A, that was going on here. So I thought it was really interesting. But I wanted to look a little bit closer at it. So I wanted to look a little bit closer. So I wanted to look really at the mile splits to see how consistent I was, just to see if there was anything else I could kind of take away from this, as it looks like I'm acclimating to this certain level of heat. Something I did not look at in the first video when we were talking about this, and I thought that data might make me kind of see if there was something that was changing with these workouts. So here are the actual mile splits, the individual 5 miles from each from the 3 runs. Here is run A, that one that was severely compromised because of the heat. The first mile went out at 7:34, and I realized pretty early on that was just not going to cut it, so I went right into the 7:50s, and man, it was a struggle to get to that 7:52 that day, and my heart rate really did show it. So I thought that was interesting that, I was way too fast on the first one, probably because that's where I was targeting on some of the other days when it was cooler, and I couldn't get my heart rate down, even though I was completely way slower than I normally would be to be an aerobic threshold zone. So I think that also shows that if you go out too fast in these workouts, you lose water, you overly stress, your heart rate goes way up early on, you overly stress everything, you develop some acid because your aerobic system is compromised. Well, now the whole thing is compromised, and you're way down here. It says 7:52. I don't know why. Yeah, 7:52 average. Let's look at run B. The one where I kind of had that breakthrough of I had the same workout, and it was significantly improved, 7:36 pace at 1:47. And as I looked at it, I went, okay, well, I went out too fast again on this first one, and then I kind of dropped it down. This 4th mile on this route has a little bit of an uphill, so that one is usually a little bit slower no matter what I do in this. And then the 5th mile is a little bit downhill, which didn't make a difference on this day. I was still struggling. But if you kind of notice that, so I kind of settled into that, 7:36 sort of, if you average them all out, 7:40s. But I probably still went out a little bit too fast. So I think this kind of shows, because I wasn't even able to drop back down. I was kind of living off a little bit these first 2 miles that were underneath, and then these other ones were slower. So I really wasn't even fully there. Not only was I not adapting my workout paces because of the heat, but I also probably wasn't acclimated. So let's look at workout C, because this really, even though C and B were kind of very similar in total results, these mile splits kind of tell a completely different story. First off, I was adapting a little bit more. I did notice that the couple days before I had gone 7:19 on the first one, so I was like, all right, let me just go and target 7:30, no faster on this. So I think that allowed my body to be a little bit more adapted to what was going on, and then I just kind of cruised in the high 7:30s. Remember, 7:36 was the average. This is that uphill mile, so it was a little bit slower by about 5 seconds on that mile than the previous 3. But then on the last one, the last mile was the fastest. Like I said, it's a little bit downhill, but I felt great because I think, 1, I was adapted, but 2, I also I adapted the workout, so I was smarter than this. But I'd acclimated, I think, at least partially, if not almost fully, at this point, to where I easily could have, kept on going. Not that 5 miles is very hard, but when you're coming at a transition period, it's certainly not very far. This will be, shorter than recovery runs here in about a week or so. But I thought that was really interesting, and this kind of tells a little bit more of the story about how the acclimatization is happening from, just that short period of time. So I think that if you're watching this and, you wanted more evidence to see if this is actually going to happen, this is a pretty short period of time, June 1st versus May 28th. Again, from when I started doing some easy runs after a break period was 12 days. The first one was on May 20th. So again, let this kind of play out. Let this happen naturally, and let the, adapt your workout so you don't do what I did on this day where I was going too fast and then I am just struggling to be super slow and not even be in the right heart rate range. Even on this day, as it was cooler and I probably lost my mind because of it, Same thing. Just make sure you're allowing your body to adapt. Be smart about it, and then you'll have these better results to where, you'd always want the last mile to be just, either exactly the same or maybe a touch faster. And I think that really shows the difference here. I wasn't pushing it anymore, so I just felt great. It's a little bit downhill, and I hadn't gotten myself into a bad situation with some of those other workout places that I was going, along with the fact that I had adapted. So, unless I have some kind of weird epiphany on another one of these runs here in the next little bit, I promise the next workout or the next video I do is going to be how you can safely and smartly add some very specific strength type training. There's two different ways with this. You have certain coaches that throw people right into the weight room and do everything they would do with even other sports. Then you have some coaches that are totally afraid of ever doing that. And I think there's a middle ground and kind of looking at specific strength, what is specific to, distance and middle distance running, that I might be able to help out when you kind of figure out what you might want to do to set up your own strength plan to kind of go along with an accent and add to what you're doing in terms of the running workouts in general, or prep here. So that'll be the next few days. If you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing. Again, I've really loved the comments that have been appearing in some of the videos. I love answering those questions. Really kind of spurs me to think about other things a little bit more so, and probably helps other people as well as those who are asking the questions and giving their comments. So please do so if you see something that you want further clarification on, or you just want to chime in on some things that you've kind of looked at. So I think that's really fascinating. I would really encourage that. Circling back, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't and you find these videos helpful, as well as hitting the like button. It really does help other people that are searching for things like this have it appear in their feed, so it only helps the channel. So I would really appreciate it if you showed the support. If you did find this at all helpful, by hitting subscribe if you found these videos enjoyable, and hitting like if you found this video itself. Also, I would encourage you to share it around if you do have that. If you found these at all helpful over the last little bit. So again, next thing up, I'll be looking at a strength plan, unless I get some great idea in the comment section for a video that I wasn't thinking of. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.